So often I see this portrayed as a key dividing point between old Earth and young Earth creationism. And I'd like to suggest that that's a false analysis of this problem, because you have stated very clearly in the Genesis text that you got plants created on the third day. And Adam and Eve don't sin until after the sixth day. So even in a calendar day interpretation of Genesis 1, you got at least 72 plus hours between the first life forms on planet Earth and the sin of Adam and Eve. And the whole question here is, from a biological perspective, that's too long of a period of time, even for a young Earth interpretation, to have nothing experiencing death, unless there was some fundamental difference in the laws of physics, or what they typically hear in the young Earth camp. They'll say, well, wait a minute. We don't claim that plants live and die.
First of all, Hugh, are you talking about here that God's command to the man and the woman to eat plants for food, and that there was at least, the text seems to indicate, plant death before the fall?
Sure.
Okay.
And so it's not just as simple as saying there was no death at all before Adam and Eve sinned. It's more complex than that. What you see in the young Earth camp, for example, is, well, of course, we've got plants dying. The text says that plants were dying. Adam and Eve were eating plants before they sinned, and plants are mentioned on the third creation day. I'm trying to bring in one additional point, however, is that there are a lot of species on planet Earth that have life cycles briefer than 72 hours. And so what do you do about that category of life? Now, there are people who say, well, wait a minute, the way we handle that is we say that the lower animal life forms are not alive either.
Maybe I could just read another quote from some Christians who have this point of view. For instance, the world before the fall had no death, disease, or suffering, as God proclaimed the finished creation very good. Consistent with this, God gave plants to the animals to eat. People and animals are described in Genesis as having or being nephesh. Nephesh conveys the idea of a breathing creature. Perhaps nephesh refers to life with a certain level of consciousness. Plants do not have such nephesh, and so Adam eating a carrot did not involve death in the biblical sense. The world will one day be restored to a state when again there will be no violence or death involving animals. Clearly there was no disease, suffering, or death of animals, nephesh creatures, before the fall.
Something that's interesting to me, God's warning to Adam and Eve, or specifically to Adam, is then you can eat of any tree in the Garden of Eden, but the day you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Now that's actually a meaningless proclamation that God would give to Adam and Eve if there was no death, because Adam has no context to understand that if there's no death in the Garden of Eden. If there was no death in the Garden of Eden, and God says to Adam, you'll surely die if you do this particular activity, what does that mean if you've never seen death?
How can he know what death is unless he's seen death
Unless
himself?
he's seen death.
Right.
He has no frame of reference.
So in other words, then the physical death is part of what would happen when he ate.
Well, something else you see in the text is that God created Adam outside the Garden of Eden and placed him within Eden.
Now, specifically there, Hugh, I think you're talking about Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, where it said, now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. And I'm reading from the New International Version, and you're suggesting that the text seems to be indicating here that perhaps God created the man first and then put him in the garden.
Right. Whereas Eve was made in the garden, Adam was made outside the garden, which means that Adam would have had the perspective of observing what the real world outside of the Garden of Eden is like. I would agree that there was probably a lesser level of death in the Garden of Eden. After all, it was a protected garden built by God himself. But Adam was aware of the two different perspectives. He knew the difference between the Garden of Eden and the world outside.